Welcome to Flywheel Leadership. I'm Graham Peely, and I'm joined by Adam W. Barney. We're going to walk through Adam's journey and discuss how he helps founders and executives navigate inflection points. Adam, what's your superpower, and how does it show up in the work you do for others?
Graham, superpower is one of my favorite words in the world. My superpower is actually networking. And I mean that by saying, Graham, it's not just about connections. I'm at somewhere in the realm, which still blows my mind, of like 13,000 followers on LinkedIn, but it's about the genuine, authentic connections that come from networking. And I actually love to talk about the fact that it's more than just connections. It's actually about collisions. And I think of that almost at a particle science level. And it's one of the most beautiful things that we can still do with the positive power of the internet as well.
Positive power of the internet. That is really important right now, isn't it?
I
Uh,
mean, I've always felt like there are positive corners of the internet. Actually, I still, Graham, will think back sometimes to my Gateway 2000 desktop computer in that cow print box with the dial-up
oh yeah,
modem. And where did I start that journey? On the Usenet, of all places. And I don't think a
nice.
lot of people these days think about the Usenet, but that was about community. I will admit here there was a incredible Rolling Stone expose probably about 10 years ago now about someone who worked at one of the CD production facilities in North Carolina where all the pre-releases would go through before they would hit your Strawberries, your Tower Records,
Hmm.
whatever those record shops you shopped at would be. And they actually were seeding the CDs out of that into the Usenet groups. So I will say I still have a working 80 gigabyte iPod that still functions, that has a lot of music that was pulled from those very illegally ripped CDs even before the days of the internet, and still play every once in a while in my household.
Nice. Very cool. Adam, the title of your podcast stands out. So I must ask, is anything real? What is real in today's world, Adam?
Oh, what's real is each of our perceptions and where we come from is actually what I would argue. What's real is the fact that you and I, even though we're not sitting in the same room or having this conversation today, and we're able to bridge these gaps together. And that's actually what the podcast really focuses on. Sure, it's about reality-based leadership and what actually works and what doesn't work in this crazy ever evolving world where we need to slow down a little bit. But really it's just asking what's real in terms of leadership. It goes back, my history. I spent over 20 years in a corporate marketing career, agencies, startups, enterprise companies. I managed $100 million in paid ad spend across the 20 plus years. I led big teams, big budgets, and big pressure. But really, what I learned early there was organizations reward output and often punish honesty. And that's what I kind of mean by is anything real? You can be exhausted, anxious, overwhelmed, and as long as you deliver, people call it drive. And in the early part of my career, I actually bought into that, right?
Hmm. Yeah. I'd love to stay on your journey. Could you kind of walk us through a little bit more on, your early days to how it got you here and what that looked
Yeah.
like?
Well, I had a moment sort of in this narrative where that narrative actually cracked, right? I was in my 20s, for instance. I was working in the agency world through the 2008 financial crisis. One of my biggest clients was Bank of America. So I think Graham and our listeners, you can imagine this. You're young, you're managing big budgets, you're in rooms with executives, but you're going home and thinking, wait, I'm helping one of the most powerful institutions in the country or the world get bigger, and I'm not sure this makes the world better, right? That was my first very tangible fracture in that success without meaning starts to let's say rot you from the inside. And then life made it more personal. I lost my mom to ALS. That was bulbar onset ALS. That's brutal. She was someone who had an incredible voice in the world, And you don't forget what it's like when someone you love is losing that voice literally and you can't do anything to fix it. And that opened up doors, realizing again, there's fracture there. Then a couple of years ago, my dad went through serious health issues as well. And then even more recently, my wife was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer, right? The fun of a double mastectomy, chemo, radiation, hormone therapy, and we've got 2 young kids and 2 dogs in the house. And I'm sharing it really, all just for one reason, because caregiving is the most ruthless leadership training program on earth. Caregiving doesn't care about your calendar. It doesn't care about your ambition. It doesn't care about your brand. It forces a very different question of what's actually real right now. So when I say, is anything real, that's where that reality comes into play.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Adam. It sounds like some real pivotal moments that really shaped how things have gone for you. So appreciate you being vulnerable there. What do you take away from that journey? What inspires you about the work you do?
Yeah. Well, I I think what inspires me is I started to realize then the leaders who are winning long term are not the ones who are just hustling the most. They're the ones that build an internal operating system that holds when life gets loud. And I actually take that inspiration of what keeps me going from my own path, because I shifted from how do we scale revenue to how do we scale leadership capacity. That's what pulled me into coaching and what keeps me going. And, it comes from that corner, Graham, where my life taught me that if you can't lead sustainably, or rather you can't lead sustainably if you're running your business from your nervous system alone. I actually call it energy debt that we accumulate. And I'll add a detail here that I think is very me. I'm still the guy, even at 43 years old, who keeps on moving, always staying optimistic. But then I realized at some point earlier in my journey that optimism without systems simply turn into what my wife has called toxic optimism, right? It's not shouting everything will be fine. And then someone, your significant other, your partner goes, cool, but also take out the trash and stop dissociating. So I had to mature my optimism into something sturdier. And that's why I do the work right now. That's why I help people with a reality first set of transition leadership coaching. It's all about helping founders, high performing leaders reclaim their energy, make sharper decisions under pressure, and to truly scale without the word that I actually hate in this world, burning out, right? Burnout is way overused. It's just about your battery not being refilled. And I'll say it plainly. I help people stop running their company from crisis mode, because a lot of leaders live in a loop of pressure, performance, depletion, shame, and then that cycle back to more pressure. But it's looking successful and feeling empty.
So, Adam, you said a couple things: leadership capacity and energy. Like, how could you walk me through what that looks like for somebody that has no idea what you really mean by that? Has a lot of experience leading and running a business, but they've never really stopped to think about their capacity as a leader or their energy level.
So think about a leader who is running, let's say, $100 million company. They have a team of probably at least 100, if not more, people that they can delegate to, they can add resources to, but they're worried about how that has scaled up as they started it as only one solo founder, right? That's kind of what I mean. I love to call myself a transition leadership coach, because the best leaders out there actually realize that change is constant and transition is always happening. It just sits in different colors. It's different flavors of it. I've actually said it in my coaching also, with the fact that, people always talk about the grass will be greener if I do this, or the grass will be greener if I move from this job to this job. The grass is never really truly greener. It's just a different shade of green. And because we're in spring now, I think that that's something many of us can see in front of us. I'm looking out my window right now. Maybe I see some moss out there, but there's grass that's very deeply, deeply dark green, and there's grass that's lighter green. But the change is constant and the transition is constant there. So the work that I do, is to identify the leaks, installing then a system, and then you upgrade that leadership behavior under stress. But I like to talk about, how do you reclaim that executive capacity in your week? And one of the very, very few things that level sets rather every human on this planet is that we all only have 24 hours in the day to get done what we need to get done. If you're running that $100 million company, or if you're running the single person business around the corner, you still have that same 24 hours to get done what you need to get done. I speak actually with a lot of high school and college students, and it's a little easier to joke with them and say, you can't be studying 24 hours a day. You have to sleep. You have to restore yourself. It's the same thing for, again, that leader who's running that $100 million company. They have to figure out what pulls their energy down and what elevates their energy back up, because the bank always collects on that energy debt. It doesn't walk away. And it's such a personal thing. It sits inside of us. There's so many things in this world that we can't control and that are outside of our control, but we can control that personal energy and how we recharge that battery or refill that cup inside of ourselves. It's not about motivation. There's a lot of coaching out there that's about inspiration. It's also not vibes. Maybe the vibes go back to the fact that, I've been to over 1,000 concerts and, went to Bonnaroo in Tennessee in 2003 and 2004. I love a good vibe, but this is about installation. Motivation evaporates, but if you actually have systems installed, they compound.
So for the founder, executive, CEO that's listening right now, can you walk us through a story of what that looks like from when you start working with someone to where they come out on the other side in whatever that transformation looks like?
Yeah. I mean, it's where I want to be compassionate and blunt here, right? Because I want to level set by saying most high performers don't have a discipline problem. It's that leak problem. It leads to that energy debt. And, energy debt, to get a little deeper, is when you borrow from the parts of your life you don't want to sacrifice, whether it's sleep, health, relationships, joy, self-respect, to keep the business moving. And the dangerous part is that it feels like it works, and that's at first. Mm-hmm. But energy debt is like taking cash advances on a credit card. You can do it. You can even look successful doing it, but the interest rate is brutal, right? And that interest rate is anxiety, irritability, decision fatigue, let's say short temper. Maybe it's numbness, could even get into resentment. And that, quiet, scary thought that I think humanity in the modern world we live in pushes on us, that if I stop, everything just falls apart. And, a lot of the tells that I listen for are, you wake up tired even after a good night's sleep. You feel productive, but you're not proud of what you're doing. You avoid those hard conversations because you don't have that emotional bandwidth to give up. And you keep promising yourself after this season or after this quarter, you'll change, but the seasons never end. It just cycles back. And then, your wider relationships start paying the bill for that, let's call it ambition. And then the most dangerous thing is it gets normalized. It's called leadership. You could call it hustle culture. You could call it the price. But it's not the price. It's a system's failure. But because, again, if your business requires you to be depleted to function, you didn't build a company. You built a trap, let's say.
Yeah.
And if you're listening, thinking, wow, Adam is reading my diary, not the one that you let other people read. I have to apologize, but also welcome. You're not alone there. And I think it really comes down to, Graham, founders are identity driven. They don't just own the business. They are the business. So delegating feels like disappearing, boundaries feel like weakness, even asking for help can feel like failure, but that also is influenced by you're often surrounded by people who benefit from you staying that way.
So, a couple things that really stand out for me. I've been in those shoes for sure, where I've been just grinding, right? Where the hours feel like the success, right? Where it's, oh, just because I'm the first one in the office or the last one online or
Ooh,
whatever, like that means I'm winning, right? And you're right. Like something you said there really stands out. You're right. Like it feeds itself and it's like a reinforcing loop. And you hear that a lot in different conversations, but it really is like it gets to be where it's like if you just take a breath and you step away from the business for a minute, you feel like you're like slacking,
mm-hmm.
like, and I mean like walking around the block or, going to the water cooler. It's like, oh man, I got to get back to it. And that's a really scary thought when you think about it at whatever level you're at. But then, especially when you're talking about a leader with a team and your impact on those people, not to mention if you're a CEO of a company that you're in charge of a lot of people, or if it's your own business, what's that impact on your clients and your family and things like
Right,
that? So just
right.
you could just start thinking about all the things that can be really wrong with that picture. So makes a lot of sense. And it's something that the longer you let it go, the more of a habit it becomes and the worse it can get. And sometimes it's pretty far down the line before you really realize it. And you're like, whoa, what am I doing?
Right, right, right. And I mean, it's really this is kind of where Energy OS comes in, right? Energy OS, it's the leadership system that I've built based on one premise that energy is actually strategy and it shouldn't be viewed as a luxury.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders treat energy like a reward after you get success. I treat it like a fuel that actually produces that success rather.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's take this into going on the line of leadership, right? What have you seen that really separates the leaders who consistently succeed from those who struggle or stall out and never seem to like really figure it out?
Well, I mean, one of the biggest things is they can go take a day off that's unplanned and realize that the whole system isn't going to collapse without them there for one day. I mean, in my leadership journey, how many times did I hear other leaders that I experienced talk about, well, what happens if that person gets hit by a bus?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want anybody in this world to get hit by a bus. But ultimately, this is a philosophical feeling that I have. But, when we face those incredible challenges, we're humans. We love habits. We love predictability. When we get challenged to move outside of that, change is, again, the only constant. We have to iterate, but that's where true learning and growth happens. It's not in the constant cycle of the wheel that we all are running around on that hamster wheel. It's when we get pushed out of those corners. And that's the difference in terms of leaders who are sustainable, Graham. They have to be comfortable with knowing that when they face a challenge and a challenge is going to come, that it's not the end. It's a road bump and they just need to get back up again and keep flexing that muscle. If we had been talking 2 years ago, I would have been talking about a podcast I would start called Founders Failures, because I truly believe that the best founders in the world are the ones that have actually failed in the first 1, 2, 5, 15 businesses they built. And they realized so much more on how they could build a successful business. And that's where they are today. But that's the same vision of where I view leadership. You have to be open-minded to the fact that, number one, nothing is ever perfect in this world. No one in human history has actually even created a silver bullet. When you start to realize that nothing is perfect and there's no magic wand that you can wave, that's when that true growth happens, because you realize that I can get through this. And, again, I don't want anyone here listening to get hit by a bus, but that's not typically what's going to happen. That's going to cause the challenge that you have to face next.
For sure, and you're exactly right. I mean, perfection doesn't exist. Perfection does not equal excellence. That's two different concepts, and a lot of times it feels like that gets mixed into one. About, well, we want things to be great. We want an exceptional experience. That does not equal it's going to always be perfect, right? There may
Well,
be perfect
and,
points, but not everything's perfect along the way. So,
well, yeah, and the other part of it, Graham, is how many times have you, if you're looking for perfection and you actually take away those expectations of perfection,
mhm,
that you can be really pleasantly surprised by the way things naturally tend to happen.
no doubt. And then another part of that is like business is problems. I mean, as an individual, your job, the company itself, in a lot of cases, maybe not all, but in a lot of cases, your whole job, the whole reason for existence is to solve a problem. So there's going to be a series of challenges, whatever you want to call them, challenges, problems, uh,
Opportunities.
opportunities, areas for improvement. Those are all why you exist in your role, or why you exist as a company. So it's kind of like you have to step back and be like, well, this is what we're here to do. We're here to solve problems, or take on opportunities and challenges.
Right, right.
So when you are looking at a leader, or I should reverse that. When you are a leader and you realize the playbook has stopped working, whatever script you've been running on for these years, it just no longer works. When do you see that? Like how does that show up? And then how do you know when you need help?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I actually see, Graham, it comes down to really three pillars there, right? First it's figuring out how to identify the leaks, right? They're not the abstract leaks, they're the real leaks. Maybe it's, I tend to look at what you're tolerating, what you're avoiding, where you're over functioning, where you're under communicating, and what you're carrying that truly isn't yours. And maybe also what you keep resolving because you don't install a system, or you won't install a system, right? And that all works to the simple truth that what you tolerate becomes your culture, and also becomes that energy drain, that energy debt that you collect. So then we move into a phase of installing the systems that hold. And this gets right into my installation over inspiration philosophy, because inspiration is great, but it's also fragile. Pressure doesn't care what you learned at the retreat 2 weeks ago. So it's about then beginning to install decision rules, right? If X happens, we do Y. No debate. It's clear, and you just do it. Delegation ladders, right? Here's what you own. Here's how you escalate. Meeting hygiene. I worked for a company in my agency days that one day they said our conference rooms are being way overbooked with meetings that aren't actually happening. So we're just canceling every meeting on the Outlook calendar. We kind of all looked at each other like, that's really? You're going to do that? They actually did it. Talk about a refresh that's even hugely impactful to think about these days, though. How do you make sure, delete all the meetings so that you can simply put the ones back on that really count for value? And that's where, so many meetings exist, but they should just exist for one outcome, or a series of simple decision-making outcomes. Also building in boundary scripts, right? Here's the sentence I need to say when I need to protect my capacity, and then starting to employ those recovery practices that are real. They're not theoretical, whether it's taking a walk, it's hydration, it's getting to the gym in the morning. I'm not going to say I recommend any founders necessarily. You see so many people championing this on social media, getting your cold plunge pool and then going out at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's not where I'm going to come in, because for the world that I live in, that's not realistic. That's not my own experience. But it's also, because if a system only works on the calm weeks, it's not truly a system. It just turns into a suggestion. And then the third pillar is really working to upgrade that leadership capacity behavior under stress. And that is where true leaders become leaders. Leadership isn't tested on the good days. It's tested when the cash is tight, your best employee is wobbling, your kid is homesick, your partner is at capacity, and your inbox is, thousands of emails deep. And Energy OS is how you stop reacting and start leading. So, I implore listeners, don't tell me what you want. Show me what you repeat, because that's your operating system. Then there's a really simple micro tool here, right, that gets into this as sort of a teaser, but I use it a lot. It's a 2-list audit. List A is what's draining me. List B is what I'm avoiding. And the overlap is almost always that first couple leaks that we identify.
Shifting to technology, what do you see when you're working with your clients, you're having conversations with other leaders? Is it more fear around AI, or is it excitement around AI?
Oh, I was at a 2-day conference last week, and you can't believe how wide the realm of conversation about AI was. You step into one room, someone said AI is going to destroy every business out there and destroy our employees. In the next room, saying, I'm excited for where this is going to go. I'm optimistic because you're going to have this next generation or two of people that you're hiring who are going to be so well versed in this from both a prompting standpoint and also a quality assurance standpoint that it changes the workforce. So I look at both sides of it. I look at AI, the true value of it comes when it helps us iterate and do better. It's not about creation. I'm not going to throw any specific names under the bus here today, but one of the keynotes last week was someone who got up there and literally had built the entire presentation with AI. She brought other people out there up on stage to do a similar thing. And I'm like, this doesn't feel, you miss that humanity inside of it. The human is still, that's the takeaway last week. That's the feeling that I've always had with AI as it's evolved over the last couple of years, is we need to keep the humanity in it. The humanity is the true value proposition of where AI can help us. And, barring AI getting too smart and it, does something absolutely terrible, we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And, I about a year ago had a really great conversation with Mike Tedasco, who's the former head of innovation at PayPal. And he actually did a great job equating the AI world that we're living in now to CGI when it started coming out in movie making in the 70s and 80s, really driven by LucasArts, of course. But, people said this is going to kill movie making. Mm-hmm. And it didn't kill movie making. Yeah. we're just going to have to use it in ways that benefit the world. Going back even to the positive nature of the internet, we have to focus on the positive impact that this is going to allow us to do. I coach a lot of micro business owners here in the US. AI, along with virtual assistants, it's a huge liberating force for those micro business owners in this country, because you don't end up spending all of your day working inside the business. You can elevate yourself above the business using those kinds of tools. And that's the beauty. That's the I mentioned toxic optimism earlier. That's there's a way to talk about toxic AI optimism. Mm-hmm. There's a balanced set of the impact of AI that's going to come in. It just shifts the flavor. It shifts the language. It changes the aperture. That's how I truly view it.
Yeah, appreciate your thoughts on that. You said something that I think you're onto something there. When it comes to, you used to hear about the messy middle, right? You have to kind of go through those messy times to figure it out. And at some points, some ways we miss the messy human side of things, like almost back to that point of perfection, where if things are too perfect or too robotic, too non-human, it starts to lose a little like respect almost, where it's like, ah, you that's not your work, that's Claude's or what, whatever. Like it's kind of a weird balance. Like everybody expects and wants people to be doing more with less, but at the same time, they still want it to be yours, not Claude or whoever. So yeah,
Right. Right.
it's very, very interesting dynamic. So who are your heroes and what did they model for you that still shapes how you operate today?
Ooh, I have a lot of heroes. I go back actually to Abraham Lincoln pretty often, simply because of the work that he was able to achieve to bring this country back together in a very divisive point in time. That's one person that I go back to, but I'm also a huge music fan, right? So I I have many heroes in that realm that I go back to and that have given me not only just the inspiration and help to resolve my own energy debt on a day-to-day basis, but those are the ones that I take inspiration from. But honestly, over the last 5 years of building this business, my heroes are the people who are in my network, the people that I've built relationships and built connections with, because I love to just be a ripple in how they deliver that impact on the world. I was at 3 events last week. One of them is my favorite event that happens every year here in Boston called Agents of Change. 150 people in the room who are all coming from the same mindset of making a positive impact with their power and influence on the world. Those are my heroes. Those are the heroes because I can show up, we can share a hug, we can talk about a struggle, we can handshake and meet for the first time, and it develops this incredible relationship that grows over time. It's truly just about my own network and the people within it and the friends. I mean, my kids are my heroes too, and the 2 dogs that are asleep downstairs. Even less real in this world, the Muppets are my hero. I have a Muppet Whatnot that's looking over me right now up on a shelf that my mother had ordered for me for a birthday a very long time ago. If I could live in a Muppet world, I would be okay with that.
I love that.
Because,
I can tell you that's never been said on my podcast.
but you see, you think about, go back to the Muppets. Like, people were struggling on the Muppets. It was about the reality of the conversation. Whether, you could go a million different directions on where that struggle was, but it was always at the forefront. And talk about nothing ever being perfect. You look at that stage in the Muppets, nothing was ever perfect in the way that show ran. And that's the comedy. That's the humanity. That's the levity that comes through the reality of situations and just how we navigate the challenges that we face.
Well said. What's one thing you've changed your mind on over the span of your career or your life in general?
The value of humble influence. That is a big one. I will not take credit for creating that term. One of my other heroes, going back to the last question, is Jim Matuga. He is in West Virginia, probably the 49th or 50th state on every list, no matter what it is, every single year in this country. He runs a marketing agency, but he has a podcast called Positively West Virginia and talks about all of the fantastic entrepreneurial business activity happening in this state that's typically at the bottom of the barrel. Mm-hmm. So humble influence is about this idea that we can have ripple effects no matter who it is we meet. I've gone through and I've done a lot of work in terms of power and influence for positive impact, and it ties back into that. I'm going to bring this really tightly back in. Last week, I'm in Boston. We're in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston. A neighbor a couple weeks ago had a terrible fire in their house. And, they're fine. Luckily, the family was safe. They're fine. rebuilt. It's the house that the Tom grew up in. You know, his sisters grew up there. Very historic home. And talk about a ripple. My first book was published in 2024. It's called Make Your Own Glass Half Full: The Empowered Path to Optimism and Autonomy. Humble influence here is the fact that I went and talked to Tom and made sure they were okay. And then later that afternoon, I wrote a note in the front of the book and signed it and dropped it in their mailbox. And I only mention this, Graham, because I actually heard from another neighbor today how much Tom appreciated getting that book put in his mailbox. And that's just about that's one sort of interesting story. But like, you hold the door for the person walking out behind you, you know, you just say good morning to someone that you don't know. The ripple effects of that can be hugely valuable. And especially with the loneliness epidemic we have in the world, the fact that people are feeling more alone than ever, when you simply say hi to someone or just give someone that small little piece of you to take, you never know what that impact can lead to, what the value of that could be.
That's really special right there, Adam. Thank you for sharing that. I love that concept of just those small things that each of us can do could mean the world to someone else. So would love to hear, like, what's the rest of 2026 look like for you? What's going to go on the rest of the year for you? Big question, a small question?
It's going to be busy. We're entering summer, right? You know, yeah. That's a crazy period to be in the middle of. The rest of 2026, it's going to be continuing trying to build this business, change more people's mindsets in the world that they can achieve the thing that maybe they didn't think they could achieve, or they can rebalance their life in a way that's valuable. You know, it's bringing this idea. Most leaders and founders think they have a time problem, but it's a toleration problem. You know, time doesn't. I'd love to just building into the fact that time doesn't disappear randomly. It gets stolen. You know, whether that's from avoidance or unclear roles or weak boundaries or identity-based overfunctioning. And if I can, you know, change the mindset of a few leaders to bring that executive capacity back into the fold, it can be transformative. And that's the ripple effect that I can bring on the world, while also, you know, continuing, of course, to bring my own podcast to the world. Again, it's about as anything real, reality-based leadership, making sure that my 2 kids are healthy and happy, the 2 dogs are fun, that my wife has a good recovery. But just keep, you know, continuing to chug on the way of the balance for myself, because I have to learn through my own experience, and that's what I bring to my coaching, and keep myself balanced as well.
Practice what you preach, right?
Exactly. Right.
Anything else you'd like to talk about today, Adam?
You know, I would just, you know, like to say, you know, if you're listening thinking this is me, I'm running hard and still empty, I've actually built a free tool for that exact moment, and it's called the Leak Locator, right? It helps identify where that energy is bleeding, whether it's in business or life or both together, and gives one clear next move you can run this week without blowing everything up, because that's not also what I'm recommending here. So, you know, you can grab that at my website, which is adamwbarney.com, and that's at /leak locator bonus. You know, and here's my ask. If this episode hit you, don't just nod. Do one thing. You know, remove one toleration this week. One. It's not 10. It's just that one, because leadership compounds when it's sustainable. But, you know, that's kind of what I would leave everyone with here.
Thank you, Adam. What do you want the people you've worked with to say about the impact on them? Yeah. Excuse me.
Yeah. I mean, I want them to say that it's allowed them to find greater balance and actually get more done when they don't feel like they have to just circle on this hamster wheel that we think we have to circle and cycle on. That's it. And honestly, Graham, outside of, that the money coming in, of course, which is one piece of the puzzle, it's just getting that thank you when that happens. That's all I look for. And because it truly resonates with people and that change is tangible, and they start to go, oh, I didn't realize I could do this. And it's not complex. The world is already pushing us. You asked about AI. We talked about AI earlier. AI is driving us to more complexity. What I bring through my coaching is more simplicity, more than anything else. It's not adding, you have to be on this app 24 hours a day. It's about, go to even your convenience store and buy a 99-cent notebook. That can be transformative. Or, my favorite things in the world, I've got Post-it notes all over my desk. That's an easy tool to remind us and actually drive tangible change together.
Adam W. Barney, thank you for joining Flywheel Leadership. We appreciate you sharing.
Thank you, Graham. This has been a blast, and I was going to say, if Riverside glitched today, I would just probably have tagged it as a leadership simulation, actually. But luckily we got through it, Graham.
Great talking with you, Adam. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.